of getting ourselves together. I'm so glad to see you back. I know that we had that snowstorm and we had spring break, and it's wonderful to see the room packed again. We have an amazing set of people here to talk to you tonight about, we've been spending time talking about Detroit's past, right, and looking at it through a racial equity lens, through a lens of structural racism, and now tonight we get to talk about the present and how that's a continuation of the past. I wanted to just there was a couple of things that we've gotten in the student reflections. One of them was, what can I do? I'm learning all this stuff that's so troubling. I want to do something about it. So our panelists tonight do have ideas about that, how you can get involved. There are things that you can do, so we'll let them speak to that. But another thing to think about is you're doing something just by relearning. So it's really important to think and understand what's going on before we act, because we could be taking the wrong action that's just perpetuating the same system. Just for example, in Flint, so there's poisoned water, right? But there's this sort of false solution out there that bottled water, but the bottled water is commodifying and privatizing the water that everybody should have access to, and the same people that are benefiting from privatizing and destroying the system are people who have interest in bottled water. So by supporting I'm not saying people shouldn't have, as an emergency measure, people need to have some kind of safe clean water. But Monica is actually going to talk about other options, even as emergency measures, that we could have besides bottled water. So it's really important for us to get the chance to think about really critically what's going on, what are the roots. And speaking of roots, when we launched this, this is our pilot, so please, if you've got feedback on our structural racism graphic, let me know. But we launched this at the very beginning, right, to talk about, and feel free to take them, there's a few left if you wanted to pass them, what systemic racism is. And so it includes what we usually think of as racism, like intentional racist beliefs and acts, but it also includes anything that causes an impact, a negative impact for other people. So like this racially disparate. So like when something is harder on African Americans, whether it was intentional or not, that policy or that practice caused it, it's still structural racism. When it has a negative impact against Native people, it's still racism, whether somebody intended it or not. And sometimes they do intend it. So, but oftentimes, just the system now is set up to do it, and it perpetuates by itself. We have to intervene. If we want to stop it, we have to intervene. If we just do nothing, it's going to perpetuate. And somebody asked that night, how does economics play into this? Are you going to talk about that? If you just think about in this country, 1492, well, not this country, but this continent, 1492, that was the purpose. Like economics, it's not just people coming over and being monstrous, right? And committing genocide and cutting off our arms and displacing us and kidnapping people from Africa and bringing them over just because they were monstrous. They were doing it because they got an economic benefit from that. When you have slavery and you don't have to pay your workers, you can get rich. Then that's an economic system. There's an economic benefit. So when we hear now, oh well, we have to do this because that's the economic, like that's the thing that's profitable and that's the thing that's going to make economic sense. It's always been that. That's what it has always been. It got set up to do that. So we can't forget the economics in it. It's at the root of it. I think of it as economics is the root, the cause, the reason, and the systemic racism is the mechanism that allows it to happen. Racism is a really easy way to divide people up. And that's how whiteness got construction in this country. Whiteness doesn't exist. The way we experience it here does not exist in Europe. Those people kill each other over there over soccer games, which are political. They're political. Their soccer games are actually political. They have political parties that are rooted to their soccer games. But Eastern Europeans, I have Eastern Europeans friends that go to Western Europe and are profiled. And they're what we would consider white in both places, but they go over there and they get profiled by the police and pulled over and roughed up because they're from a lower social class. So what happened here, though, was that indentured servants and African slaves were rising up together, and And the elite couldn't take that, so they created this idea of whiteness, and white indentured servers are better, and you're in a better position, and we'll give you a little bit more to divide people. And so that's like a way that we were divided hundreds of years ago that we've got to repair, because it's hurting all of us. And it's in the deal, in the equity lab, we really keep it centered on race because there's something else, and we can't totally put our finger on it, but there's something else that happens. So even when you have, we just don't have, first of all, we don't have income equality, but even when you do, there's still a huge wealth gap. So there's like between 13 and 20 times wealth gap between white people, median, and the median of whites and the median of blacks in this country right now. And the biggest part of that is home ownership. So like the number of years that someone owns a home. And so that's what makes tonight's topic so much more heartbreaking for me, because these water shutoffs and the tax foreclosures are taking people away from home ownership in the city. They're taking, we have a really high, we used to have a really high rate of home ownership. It was attacked by the predatory lending practices that Mark will talk about. So that was sort of the first wave that attacked the homeowners in the neighborhoods. And now the water shutoffs and the tax foreclosures are taking those homes away from people. And that's the biggest factor of building wealth. And we're allowing it to be destroyed. It's being destroyed in the city. And it's the African American community that is facing it the hardest. So, and you know, I don't like gentrification, but the one silver lining might have been that people got raised home values and could have actually gotten something in the city. I mean, everybody else gets to have their home values increase. And if you've been in the city, I mean, for my family, decades and decades and decades, those housing prices, you know, the value of our homes never increased. We sold it for the same amount that we bought it for if we were lucky. And now, when there's a time when the values are actually increasing, and maybe people could build their wealth on that, they can't because they're being cut out. So I'll turn it over to the panel now, and they can give you all the details. We have incredible speakers here tonight: Monica Bliss-Patrick from We the People of Detroit, Mark She's going to talk about her work with the Water Warriors. Mark Fancher from the ACLU of Michigan. And Marilyn Mullane from Michigan Legal Services, who's going to talk to you about water foreclosure, or the tax foreclosures and how they're linked to the water.
Peace, family. I am Monica Lewis-Patrick. I'm the president and CEO of We the People of Detroit. And I'm so glad I get to go first. Because if you don't know, Mark Fancher is like the Denzel Washington litigants in the city of Detroit. He's smooth, he's dapper, he's fine. And then you have the brilliance of Miss Mullane, who has been working. Oh yeah, y'all see it. Y'all check it out. And then you have the brilliance of Miss Mullane, who's been doing just incredible work in the city of Detroit for low-income and working-class folks. And so anytime I get to sit with that kind of brilliance, I sort of pinch myself. Like, what are you doing here? How did you get with this group? But one of the things we wanted to do is bring to you some of the research that we're working on right now, because there is this rumor going around that grassroots folks are not educated. The grassroots folks just, you know, can't speak to these large audiences of academia. Well, we wanted to dispel that. We also wanted to dispel a lie, a terrible lie that was put out by Judge Rhodes, who, in his opinion, he felt as though water shutoffs were okay. That he knew people were going to die, and some people would get sick, and some people would be severely impacted, but he was okay with that because he was wedded to this narrative of the comeback of the city of Detroit, even if it was a lie. Well, I'm going to be over there. That's okay, I can talk. Well, one of the things I was hoping is you would be able to see a project that we're working on. We the People of Detroit is collaborating with several universities and researchers, not only here in the state of Michigan, but around the country. Because what we wanted to do is do a couple of things. One, we wanted to dispel the myths, debunk the myths that water shutoffs had to happen just because people are not paying their bills. We also wanted to debunk the fact that many of these issues are structural issues that have happened over decades in terms of the denial of revenue sharing, the inability to get good deals as it relates to bonds and restructuring of the debt. We wanted to make sure that people could get a visual understanding of what all of this gentrification and what I believe is leading to genocide looks like. And so we came together and we caucused, I'd say maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the bankruptcy, because we knew that things were going to get worse, and they did. What we saw is that right before the bankruptcy, you were seeing somewhere in the neighborhood of about 1,000 shutoffs a week. What we saw immediately after bankruptcy was about 3,000 shutoffs per week. Now let me tell you what that looks like. In the morning, when you get up to brush your teeth, no water. When you get ready to go to the bathroom, no water. When you're trying to make oatmeal or your coffee or your tea, no water. For those of you that have teenagers, I don't know about you, but I have several. If they play sports, they get in your car and it smells like you picked up the football team of the Lions. So there's no water. If you are a young woman, your hair, your grooming, your hygiene is very important to you as a teenager. No water. If you're an elder that has some kind of incontinence or some medical condition that needs water, no water. We have gone to homes with, I'll give you an example, one young woman who has MRSA's, which is highly contagious. She has to take a bath in a combination of water and Clorox to be able to just keep the contamination down in her household. She lives off of $658 a month. Her water bill is close to about $3,000. Some of that debt is hers, some of that is the debt related to the vacant house next to her. So for her, even if she was put on this very mysterious payment plan that Mayor Duggan has created, she can't afford her water. So what does that mean for her neighbors and her children in her household? That means that she's highly contagious. That means that just she alone could create a health hazard just on her block because there is a lack of access to water. Some of the other things that we've seen people that haven't had running water in this city for more than 3 years. When you talk to those people, are they just, as Kevin Orr said, fat, happy, and lazy? No. What you'll find is that many of them are retirees. There are people that retired with a pension of about $19,000. There are people that have actually had their health care cut through the bankruptcy. They went from paying $125 a month to now they're paying anywhere from $500 to upwards of $1,000 a month. Imagine that for your grandparents. And we've seen water costs go up over the last 10 years to the tune of about 128%. So even if you're looking at that individual, no one, unless you're extremely wealthy, could absorb that kind of impact, that kind of financial hit. And then when we look at what's happening as it relates to foreclosures, what we found out through our research is that many of the foreclosures that have happened in the last couple of years, there is an attachment to water debt. Because what they've done is they've allowed that debt to roll over onto the homes and then force those particular persons out of their homes because they can't afford the water. We know in the city of Detroit that up until the late 90s, we had the largest home ownership in the country. Yes. In the country. So when people want to talk about Detroiters not being responsible, not contributing to the system, we built the system. Yes. We provided water to 4.3 million Michiganders. And that debt is on the backs of the people that not only were the former residents of Detroit that have died and passed away, but that legacy debt is still with us today. So out of our benevolence and our love and our understanding of humanity, that system was continued to be built, but it actually supplemented the suburbanites that were building out in the suburbs. How many of you know that the water we sell to the suburbs, we sell it to them wholesale? How many of you thought that we were just gouging the dickens out of the suburbs?
No.
That it was just a payday. It was a run on the bank. No. We actually sell water to our suburban customers wholesale. Guess who pays the bulk of that? The residents of Detroit. We pay retail. The other thing that you may not know is that there is a direct correlation between what happened in Flint with the poisoning of the people there and what has happened in Detroit with the cutting off of water in Detroit. And I'm going to try to run this down very quickly because I want to make sure that we get other voices in. There's a name that you all should know. How many people have heard of Veolia?
Who?
Veolia.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Veolia is an international privatizer of water, as well as transportation and some other things they have their hand in. And so I'm going to try to connect the dots as quickly as I can. Veolia is not only advising the city of Detroit in how to privatize the inner workings of Detroit's water system, they're also advising on how to develop the Great Lakes Water Authority. They're also advising Flint, and had advised Flint, that it was okay to drink poison water from the Flint River. Veolia also has its hands in the privatizing of the transportation system for the city of Detroit for the children as it relates to the schools. Veolia also has its hand in the M1 rail project. Guess who's the attorneys for Veolia? Jones Day. Jones Day is the second largest law firm in the world. They are the law firm that Kevin Orr, the emergency manager for the city of Detroit, worked for and now has returned to. Also, as it relates to Jones Day is the law firm of the Detroit Free Press and News. So if you think you're not always getting the story quite right, that's where that connection happens. Also, Veolia is a part of this agenda to make sure that they get to manage not only DWSD, the Great Lakes Water Authority, but guess what? The KWA, the water system in Flint. So all of this regionalization of water is really an agenda to take public dollars, to take the public comment of water and transfer it into private hands. The other thing that you may not know and need to know is how important it is to keep water as a common. Many of the places where water is privatized, you will find that the quality of the water has reduced and the cost of the water has increased. One of the terms you'll hear Gary Brown use often is optimization. Well, what his plan is for DWSD is they want to reduce the quality of the chemicals that they're using to treat our water here in the city of Detroit, where we've gotten it pretty well over the last couple of decades. I mean, we have an award-winning water system. So why would you mess with that? Well, it's cost savings is what they say. What we know is about privatization. It has nothing to do with saving money, because they could have saved money by keeping Flint on the Detroit water and sewage system. They could have also saved money for Detroit, because the more people that participate in the process, the more cost savings that can be garnered. It would have also helped the entire region to invest in that particular system if you were going to do any kind of upgrades or any repairs, because we all were drinking from that same system. Now what's happening is, as it's moving toward privatization, you're seeing in Flint, now they can't drink from a water system that they were able to drink from with no problem. And so some of the things that I'm hoping that you will do is you will educate yourselves on Veolia. There are going to be campaigns and actions developed around resisting Veolia and moving them out of not only the city of Detroit, but out of the state of Michigan. I can tell you other communities have done it and they have been successful at it. Veolia has tried to impose this austerity in places like Pittsburgh, Baltimore, St. Louis, and all of those communities have successfully pushed them back. There is no way that you are sitting in Detroit, which is the arsenal of democracy, which put the world on wheels, and we can't run Veolia out of town. that you must do is you have to connect the fact that it is very important for us to maintain control over not only DWSD, but is to encourage and work with other networks such as Flint, Highland Park is key in this, because the water system connects us. And what they've tried to do in the suburbs is use this as a divisive measure to say, well, you know, in Detroit, they can't manage themselves, and they had a financial downfall, and they weren't able to get their stuff together, so we had to step in. Well, emergency management, at the core of all of this, is anti-democratic.
Yep, that's right.
It's anti-people.
Yep.
It's anti-our vote. It's anti-our voice. And I don't know about you, I'm a Southern girl, I'm adopted Detroiter. I don't take well to you coming and taking my stuff.
Yeah.
It just doesn't sit right for me. And I also don't take well to the fact that my children will inherit poison water or no water.
That's right.
And that would become the standard. And so we've got to make a choice. We're at a crossroads. One, what are we going to do about Flint? Well, these are some of the things you can do. If you haven't heard of the Flint Democracy Defense League, that's an organization that's on the ground in the trenches. You need to follow them on Facebook. You need to connect with them, see what you can do to support their work. What are you fighting for? These are organizations in the trenches. Many of the people in Flint, they've stopped delivering water now. I know you haven't heard that. There's no more delivering of water door to door in Flint, where you're looking at a community of about 40% of them are living at or below the poverty level. You also need to understand that here in the city of Detroit, you've got over 100,000 people that don't have access to running water in their homes. You have to do something about that. Now, I know Mark is handsome, and we love Miss Mullane, but it's up to you. It's up to you. I had some people at U of M the other day tell me, well, isn't the government responsible for protecting us from drinking contaminated water? Well, guess who the government is?
Snidely do wrong.
No, you are the government. You are the government. We the people, that's right. Say it, somebody. You talking to me now. You talking my kind of stuff. We the people. We are the government, and we must take that power. We must use that power. We must hold people accountable. You cannot have Mr. Duggan tell you that water assistance is water affordability. Because water assistance, what they already know is that $1 million will only cover 1,000 people. So when you tell me you're going to gift $4.3 million to be able to provide access to water for people that can't afford it, and you're going to spread that over a region, that's not for the city, that's for the region. Then you're telling me that you only care about, what, 4,300 people having water? When I've already told you over 100,000 people don't have water? So you're not trying to fix the issue. What you're trying to do is you're trying to cloud the issue, hoping that many of us will stay asleep and we won't respond and we won't hold them accountable. What is it that we need? We need water affordability. What water affordability will do, it will allow the amount of money that a person can afford to pay to go into the coffers of the system as opposed to no money. Because when you tell me that the bill is $150 and I only got 50 cents in my pocket, then there's nothing I can do. But if you tell me to pay what I can, you'll at least get that quarter. You'll at least get half of that 50 cents. And that's what we've got to move toward in this city. And then the other thing that I'm hoping you'll do is that as we move forward, there is a collective research project that's going on that has about 8 universities involved and 21 researchers and persons from the world of academia. We must reshape the messaging so that people are hearing these stories. We can take it out to water parties. I know for young folks in the room, y'all might want a little ambiance and music going on. We can make that happen too. But we've got to figure out how to engage our community in a way that they are being activated. And I'm going to leave you with this phrase. You've got to deputize yourself. You can't wait on anyone to come and help you or save you. You have to understand that you as an individual have all that you need to be activated in this moment to take on leadership. It's not coming from Washington. It's not coming from Lansing. It's going to come from you. You're the leader you've been looking for. And then as you begin to work on your issue and work on this issue or some aspect of it, then you're modeling for others that they need to be involved as well. And the Honorable Coleman Alexander Young said it, and I've been repeating it over and over. If you find a good fight, get in it. Well, I can tell you that this water struggle is the fight of your lifetime, and it is in your best interest that you get in it.
Yep.
Next we have Mark Fancher, the CEO of Michigan, to talk about the ramifications legally of both the water shutoffs and the tax foreclosures.
You know, there are a lot of struggles that I find myself in. And many times when you're going up against an adversary, you hate what they do. You really hate what they do. But on a certain level, you kind of respect how they're doing it. I mean, for example, with respect to the emergency manager law, this vicious, immoral, hateful law was despised by the masses of the people of Michigan, and the people organized against it. The people fought really hard to get this on the ballot so that there could be a referendum. And they went and they had to fight court battles, they had to fight in the street, they had to fight guerrilla style, they did everything that they could possibly do in order to defeat this law. And guess what? They came up and they succeeded. They ended up repealing the emergency manager law. But Jones Day took a trip up to Lansing, and they said, well, these people, they figured this out. They figured out how to get rid of this law. They understood that under Michigan law, if you put an appropriations provision in a statute, then it's no longer subject to referendum. And so they went back up to Lansing. They got the same legislation, essentially, included an appropriations provision, and passed the emergency manager law so that it's basically bulletproof. Now, I hate that. But I gotta respect the brilliance and the shrewdness of that on a certain level. On a wicked level, I mean, that's shrewd. That's very smart. I can deal with that. I can fight hard against that. I mean, I can understand that. But what I don't understand, and what's so very much present with respect to these water shutoffs and the tax foreclosures, is just a lot of dumb stuff. I mean, just really dumb stuff. I mean, there's no thought behind this. This is just dumb. I mean, this doesn't have to happen. And specifically with respect to water affordability, it's something that can be taken care of very easily. I mean, Kwame Ture, who many of you know as Stokely Carmichael, used to say that the problems that exist in a capitalist society are easily resolved. Tell me what the biggest problem is in a capitalist society. And they say, well, a lot of people are poor, they have no money. He says, give them some money. Right, so with respect to water, if people can't afford to pay the water, give them something that they can afford. That's all that there is to the idea of the water affordability plan. And it makes sense. Because if you're billing people for water, and they're not able to afford to pay it, they're going to pay you nothing. They're not going to pay you one dime, and then you're going to end up having to figure out how to make up the costs of dealing with your remaining customers, and the infrastructure continues to deteriorate and decline because you're getting nothing from a bunch of people. But if you have a water affordability plan, then you go to the people, you find out why is it that you can't afford it, how much can you pay, you get them to pay what they can pay, and you get more than what you would have gotten otherwise. It just makes sense. But instead of doing that, they do dumb stuff. And they say, we're not going to come up with an affordability plan at all. We're just going to go and shut people's water off. And not only are we going to shut people's water off, we're going to pay a whole lot of money to do it. Money that we don't even have. Dumb stuff.
Yeah.
So water affordability plan is an idea which has been around for more than a decade now. Maryland fought hard for it. Many people have fought hard for it, but the city, DWSD, and everybody involved has said that they want no part of it. And eventually people came to understand that it just made sense, that it's a smart thing to do. But the responses to it, the responses to knowledge, the responses to understanding, the responses to people who have analyzed it and understand that it makes sense, the responses to experts who have come in here and looked at this problem and said that water affordability makes sense for Detroit, the response has been, well, these are just a bunch of deadbeats. These are people who don't want to pay for their water. I dare any of them to go to the houses of some of these elders who have limited fixed incomes, if that, and to tell them to their faces that they're deadbeats and that they don't want to pay. I dare any of them to go to the homes of people who are sick, people who can't move from their beds, people who can't do anything, and tell them that they're deadbeats and that they don't want to pay. I dare any of them to go to the homes of people who make a decent income, people who are prepared to pay their water bills, but who get water bills that say that they owe $8,000 when they've used only $800 worth of water. And they can't pay $8,000. And tell them that they're deadbeats and that they don't want to pay. I dare any of them to go to the homes of people who have gotten their water bills, who have gone down to try and pay the bills, and who've not been allowed to pay the bills because of all kinds of red tape and the runaround that they've gotten, and tell them that they're deadbeats.
Say it.
So we must understand it's just a lot of dumb stuff. And then the other dumb thing that they say is they say, well, if we like the idea of a water affordability plan, the law says that we can't do it. Whoa. Now, I know the law, and I haven't seen that. Oh, yes, yes. You know, there is this thing called the Headley Amendment. I know the Headley Amendment very well. Okay. Well, the Headley Amendment won't let us do what? For those who don't know, the Headley Amendment is a provision that in the Constitution it says that you can't impose a tax on people unless the majority of the voters have approved it. And so I said, well, what are we're talking about water, and water bills. Where is the tax in that? Oh, yes, if we have a water affordability plan, then we're going to have to charge more to the other customers, and then that additional amount that we're paying, that's a tax. And nobody approved that. And so therefore we can't do it. Whoa, now wait a minute, where do you get that? Well, there's a case that says that, what case? What's the case you're talking about? It's a case. It was decided by the Michigan Supreme Court. I mean, it's called Bolt versus Lansing. Bolt versus Lansing. Well, let me go read that case. I read the case, every other lawyer who's honest, who reads the case, and what the case says is that you can have a water affordability plan. I mean, they just stand up and look you dead in the eye and lie to you.
Right.
I mean, they act like you don't have sense, that you're illiterate, that you can't read the case, and you can't see it. What the case says is that when you're considering things like this, issues like this, you use good common sense. That's what the case says. The case says that you look at three things. The first thing that you look at is whether what's being proposed here with this additional payment is regulatory in nature or whether it's revenue raising in nature. So if you look at the idea of any additional charge that's in place for a water affordability plan, is that part of delivering water services? Or is this for the purpose of getting more money so that you can build parks and that you can, improve the infrastructure? No, it's for paying for the water that's being delivered. It's regulatory, it's not revenue raising. I mean, the other aspect of it that you look at is whether it's proportionate. Is what you're paying for proportionate to what you're getting? And you are. Because what you're doing, even if you're not on the affordability plan, even if you're not taking advantage of it, by your helping to make sure that it's in place, you're keeping costs down for yourself. Because by doing this, by getting some money from people who can't pay the market rate, by getting some money from them and not having to pay millions of dollars for people to go out there and shut their water off, you're keeping the water for yourself affordable. It makes sense. But they're telling you a lot of dumb stuff. And then the final one is whether it's voluntary in nature. Is this something that people are doing because they want to or because they have to because it's a tax? When we're talking about a tax, we're talking about a situation where people don't have any choice about whether they have to pay it. This time of year, every year, if you ask me, do you want to pay your federal income tax or do you not? I say, no, I do not, but I must. I have no choice. That's the nature of a tax. But if I own a piece of property in Detroit, and I don't have a building on it, if I don't have a house on it, and I don't need water services, they can't come around to me and say, oh yeah, you know, you gotta pay water bills. No, I don't get any water, so therefore, don't have to pay it. It's totally voluntary. So whether you get water or whether you don't is a decision that you make as a property owner. So it is voluntary. It satisfies all three criteria that are set forth in the Bolt versus Lansing decision. But these people, I think they think that if they lie enough, if they say it often enough, that people will start to believe them. I mean, they say it with a real straight face. I mean, they say it in front of judges. I mean, they say it in front of anybody, and they think that people are dumb. No, what they're saying is a lot of dumb stuff. And when we get to the issue of tax foreclosures, there's more dumb stuff that goes on. Because one of the things that they do, and the way that they figure out what the tax is on a piece of property and whether they should foreclose or not, it depends a lot upon the amount that the property has been assessed for. You know, they go and they evaluate the property and figure out what the market rate is, what's the appropriate value of the property. Well, it makes sense that if you're going to figure out what the tax is on a piece of property, that you would go and you would figure out the value of it during the year in which you're making the decision about how much the tax is. But in Detroit, they don't do that every year. They let a couple years go by, 3 years, 4. They just let time go by. And then they don't take into account the fact that the property values, because of a whole lot of things that have happened in the city, have gone down. So that when the assessed value comes out, it's in a value that is well in excess of what the actual value of the property is. And so it puts people in a bind because they're sitting on property that's not worth what they're being taxed on, and then they end up subject to foreclosures. That happens in Detroit because they do dumb stuff here. But if you go to any other suburban community, any other city, then they assess the value every year. And then if you get this and you find yourself in this situation and you don't have very much money, you're in a situation, you know, built into the system is something called a poverty exemption, which you can take advantage of, which will help you to get out from under the burden that you're facing. But in this city, you can't take advantage of it because, first of all, if you go down there and you say, oh, you know, I want to take advantage of the poverty exemption, then they say, well, I can't give you the form. I know, but I'm standing right here. Can't you just give me the form? No, I can't. I have to mail it to you. Why? Because that's the rule. Oh. So you go home and you wait for them to mail it to you. They may mail it to you 2 or 3 weeks later. You get it in the mail, you look at it, and you see that it has to be filled out and turned in 3 weeks ago. You're no longer eligible for the poverty exemption. And that's just the beginning of the dumb stuff that happens with respect to this whole thing. I'm going to let Marilyn tell you a whole lot more about tax foreclosures. You know, other things that are dumb about it. So, but in wrapping up, let me say, I'm going to echo what Monica said. You know, the critical thing and what makes the difference in these struggles is whether the people on a mass level are prepared to wage these struggles in the arenas that have been established by the enemy. We don't want to do dumb stuff. A dumb thing would be for you, all of us, close to 100 people or more in this room, to get up and to leave and to think that myself, Marilyn, and Monica are going to fight these battles.
That's right. That's it.
There is nothing that any of us, the three of us, can do that you can't do. If you want to know what Bolt versus Lansing says, you can read it. You can understand it. You don't have to have legal training to understand it. Read it, understand it, and once you read it and you understand it, we increase our legal firepower 100-fold. And not only do you have an obligation to read it and to be prepared to fight about it and to struggle with it, but also you have an obligation to do it because if you don't, then not only are you not helping yourself, you're exploiting us. You're basically sitting back and saying that we're going to let them do all of the work. And nobody wants to do that here because all of you are people who struggle and who fight. We're just telling you how to do it. And one other suggestion I want to make is that in engaging all of us in these fights, that we extend it even further. You know, in looking at the history of movements, I've never been one to favor the use of children in dangerous situations. As wonderful as the outcome of the children's campaign was in Birmingham, Alabama, I cringe every time I see those little children out there facing dogs and fire hoses. You know, I mean, and this is just critical analysis, you know, of movements, and I'm not big on using children. However, I think in struggles of this kind, it is not too soon to engage children in the process of learning about these issues, analyzing them, studying them, and I know that they're capable of doing it because I talk to them about it when I go to schools and talk to classes. They're very capable, they're very concerned, and not only to have them learning about these things, but to have them, to help them, to counsel them, to form their own little committees, their own little advocacy groups who make appointments with public officials and go in and engage them face to face and talk to them about their concerns, about their future and their present. It will be a powerful resource for the entire community. And it's a powerful resource not only because of the impact that they would have on those who they have to deal with in City Hall or elsewhere, but in terms of the public image that it presents, in terms of Detroit and the commitment that the people have from the earliest age all the way up to the oldest, but also it begins early, the process of training these people so that they become even more effective advocates as they get older and they become our age. It's a powerful weapon, a powerful tool that can build continuity into the movement, that can build a bank of expertise and resources in the movement that it doesn't currently have. It's an untapped resource, an untapped avenue, one that we've not pursued before in a big way, but one that I think we really need to pursue. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, well after that, it's pretty difficult to make taxes and tax foreclosures interesting. But believe me, they are. I got involved in tax foreclosure work way back in 1999, 98 and 99, when this state decided to change its tax foreclosure laws to accelerate the process. The reason for accelerating, the stated reason for accelerating the process was to put property into productive reuse. Now I know in future classes you're going to be talking about the land bank, the Detroit Land Bank Authority and other land banks. If you look at the Detroit Land Banks Authority's website and you look at their mission is to put property into productive reuse. Now, I don't know what I'm not getting here, but when a family is using a house to live in, I think that's a pretty productive use of that property. And I don't know why it needs to be put into some other productive reuse, perhaps for another family. But that's what has happened really with this tax foreclosure process. When the legislature was considering accelerating the process and putting property into productive reuse, we suggested that maybe they try this new massive procedure on vacant properties first. Let's see how that goes before we start taking occupied properties. Something really simple, but the legislature was totally resistant to that. The other reason for changing the laws is I need to explain how tax foreclosures used to work prior to 1999. Prior to 1999 in Michigan, anyone could pay the tax bill for anyone else and obtain a lien on that person's home. There were only 7 states that really allowed this, and Michigan was one of the 7. And so what that did was it invited in tax scavengers, investors, who would come in. They could pay a tax lien, county tax lien, might only be a couple of $100. and they would earn 50% on their money in a year. Where else can you get that kind of a return on an investment? And so it really didn't make any sense for the county or the government to have individuals from everywhere else, and there were a lot of out-of-state tax scavengers that would target the 7 states that were left with this kind of arcane process. And they could come in and purchase tax liens on the homes of unwitting homeowners. Homeowner then sees the tax bills paid, doesn't think anything about it, may think that the bill was a mistake. And they get a new bill, and the next bill shows that the old bill was paid off, or it's zero, there's no balance due. No one's going to challenge that necessarily. And then when they are losing their house, it's the private investor who forecloses, not the government. And the private investor can either get 50% on their money within a year, or if the homeowner isn't willing or able to pay that to redeem the home, then the investor can foreclose on the tax lien and take the home, which is probably worth more than the amount invested plus the 50%. So either way, it's not a loss for the investor, whatever happens. The investor, if the family comes up with the money, they make 50%. If the family doesn't come up with the money, they make a whole lot more. So the idea was, from the state's point of view, and this did make some sense, to step in, and if there were going to be any sales of property, for the state to get that money, not for private investors elsewhere in the country. And so that was also part of this redesigned tax foreclosure process. But in the process, they created a one in which the state, the local governments who tax, could have the county, could request that the county be the primary collecting agent. And the county would file a single tax foreclosure case. In Wayne County, it's one giant case. At this point in time, today, involving 62,000 properties, one case. There's plenty that can go wrong there with one case, and that many properties in front of one judge. And so they began this new process. We predicted that the numbers would cascade the way they were going to, and that this would be a bad idea for cities. Just sort of like the water, it's another dumb idea. This part of it was very dumb, but nonetheless, the legislature passed it. So in the first year of this new law, there were a total of a whopping 1,800 properties in tax foreclosure in Wayne County, in all of Wayne County, Detroit, 22 cities. We were not involved that first year, and that was 2002. It was 3 years following the property goes into foreclosure 3 years following the year of tax delinquency. And so at that point, we were not involved. And at the end of the process, the University of Michigan actually studied what happened and presented a paper indicating that 1,000 homes went to auction, and they were purchased largely by 5 investors. At that point, we got involved the next year, and there were about 2,300 homes that year up for foreclosure, and not a single home was lost, occupied home. The next year, then the numbers start cascading. The next year it was 3,600, and the next year it was 4,800, and then the next year it went to 5,600, and then Detroit started adding water bills. And the number jumped to 10,000. And this year was about 2009, and at that point you just see this enormous bump in foreclosures. And not only that, but the problems got much more difficult to resolve. Because in the early years, before Detroit decided to even transfer its own taxes to the county for payment, the amounts, the county taxes were a few $100s compared to maybe $1,000 in city taxes. So it was a much easier problem to resolve. There were resources at the Department of Human Services that could pay up to $2,000 on a tax bill. So there were many different things that we could do to try and save that home. But when the water bills started getting added and the city taxes started getting added, and they got added because in order for the county to collect the taxes through the foreclosure process, it has to pay the taxes to the city. So in the early years, it not only made sense for the city because the taxes get paid for a city, on the edge of bankruptcy, but it also made sense for the city's water board to make the same decision and to transfer the water bills onto tax liens. That's a decision that the local government has to make, and then transfer those liens to the county for collection, because the county then pays the water bill. So you would think, well then why is there any kind of, all the bills are essentially being paid by the county. But at some point the chickens come home to roost, because when the county then forecloses and sells the property at auction for as little as $500 or less, or it doesn't sell at all, the county doesn't recoup what is lost, and it has the right to charge the city back. So at some point it's a losing proposition, and that point was reached very, very early. As property values dropped dramatically between the predatory lenders and the subprime lenders who were foreclosing on homes in Detroit. I mean, it's one thing when the private lenders are doing this, it's more difficult to get a handle on or control what's going on there. But on the other hand, when the government, we, the people, is doing this to ourselves, because the tax foreclosures far outstrip the mortgage foreclosures by at this point, $60,000 a year, nearly. And as the numbers continued to increase, and they went to then, when they leveled off a few years ago at 42,000, we thought we were at the limit. And that was only because there wasn't enough staff in the county to process the foreclosures. And then it went to, last year was a record, 72,000. And this year, it's come down somewhat to 62,000, with 38,000 of those, 62,000 parcels in Wayne County. 52,000 of those are in the city of Detroit. And of those, there are vacant lots, 38,000 are occupied homes. And as Mark says, there's a poverty exemption program. Most of the families, homeowners who are losing their homes are people who are in a condition of poverty, who should have been able to get an exemption. They shouldn't even be losing their homes. If they had been able to get an exemption, their taxes would be zero. Nonetheless, because they weren't able to jump through these hoops, or they didn't even know about the program, they didn't get an exemption, and it's too late after the fact to do it retroactively. And that's the problem we're facing. But why does the city have to transfer the taxes so that we wind up in a foreclosure situation? Why can't the city decide, we're only going to transfer vacant properties to the county through this process? That's a decision the city could make, and it hasn't. And so that's the kind of advocacy I think that would be very, very helpful. There were a couple of years when there was a moratorium on tax foreclosure of sorts, and those were election years. Because the auctions are held in September and October, and that's very close to the November elections. In fact, end of October. Usually around Halloween, appropriately. So there were a couple of years when the treasurer held off on the foreclosure of occupied homes, merely because it was an election year. But it seems like if it could be done then, it can be done now. And it certainly can be. There's no law that says that any treasurer has to go forward with this process. Now, the latest news is that the county treasurer quit, and the former county treasurer is now working as a city treasurer. So there may be some new opportunities here for some advocacy. to make sure that there are not foreclosures this year, because families losing their homes, who are largely persons in a condition of poverty, that's the language in the statute, should not be losing their homes. Their financial, economic situation has not changed in the last several years, for which they were taxed and for which they are losing their homes. So, anyway, I think that's an important issue, if you could work on a moratorium on tax foreclosures. And there's plenty of work to be done. In the meantime, we have trained, last year we trained 197 community advocates who went into neighborhoods, knocked on doors of households that were whose homes were in foreclosure. Last week, or 2 weeks ago, we sent out a mailing to 14,000 families in Detroit who were in tax foreclosure because they owed 13 and 14 taxes, nothing earlier than 13. And those persons can all get a free 1-year extension and get their homes pulled out of foreclosure, as long as they apply by March 18th, which is next week. And so we're always looking for volunteers to help with that. After that, there will be some cost, some percentage of the debt that they have to pay, but we're hoping to be able to, because these are all just discretionary policy decisions that the treasurer is making. They're sort of making it up as they go along in terms of these payment plans. The same is true with water. And so it makes, you know, if anybody is interested in being trained as a community activist to knock on doors, do outreach, help process some of these distressed owner occupancy extensions, we would welcome the help. And I have cards that I can pass out after the meeting. We had some U of M law students in last week who were helping on their alternative spring break, some students from Boston this week, but nobody next week. And next week is the deadline week, and so we could really use help with that.
So we still have about half an hour for questions. And I want to just open it up and ask, we've been talking a lot about displacement in this series, so we started off with displacing of Native people and what are the mechanisms. So one of the mechanisms was treaties and broken treaties, really, that were used to move Native people out, also genocide. When we think about moving closer to this time period in Detroit, we often talk about the freeways. So the freeways cutting through Black Bottom and Paradise Valley and Mexican Town that used eminent domain to take land from people of color and build roads and also build really nice neighborhoods, which was actually also a mechanism that was used against Native people. So I don't know if you know that, but so after they would make this treaty that they would later break and put people on reservations, and they'd give them this idea that, well, you're gonna get to, that's yours now, and we won't bother you there, then they would put a road right through it. They didn't put the road around it, and put it right through it, and I've got a quote that I found that I want to share with you, that I'll put, we can post, where they were intentionally saying, well, we're gonna tell them that this is great, like it's gonna help them, they can get, trade, and they can get to see their neighbors by using this road, but actually, we're gonna put this through, it's gonna divide their community, it's gonna make them settle or move away, and we're gonna move in white settlers all around that road, so it's gonna make them really uncomfortable, and they're gonna either move away or settle down, like they said that. And that was to the Potawatomi people, which is, our first speaker was Potawatomi. So that's a mechanism that has been used for a long time against many people. So I wondered if you could talk about eminent domain and the difference between that and the kind of displacement that's happening now. Because I think when I think of eminent domain, there's a couple things, is that people have to get paid a fair market value for their property when you take it from them, and they also fight it. They often fight it in court and sometimes win. And this is a whole different level of taking people's property for urban renewal.
And if there's a taking, with federal funds involved, and there's that kind of an acquisition. Then there's also federal relocation rights. For example, residents who live in the Del Rey area currently are facing relocation for the new Gordie Howe Bridge. But they are being paid for their homes, 125% of value, and they're being paid a relocation amount on top of what they're being paid for their homes that is intended to be the difference between what their homes are worth and what they get and what it would take to move into decent, safe, and sanitary housing elsewhere so that they're made whole. The intent is to make them completely whole. And that is not what's happening here. With the tax foreclosures, we have just this giant, I remember reading this, and this image has really stuck, this description of the process, which is as a giant conveyor belt, just pushing families out of the city, or pushing them in with other families. They're losing their equity, 100% of anything that was available in the property for family wealth. It affects not only, as you were describing earlier, not only the families who are directly in tax foreclosure, but all of their neighbors who, it destroys communities, never mind property values, but it destroys communities, it destroys equity. The average drop in value in properties in Detroit through this period, through the last 7-8 years, has been 90%. And you look at neighborhoods, just driving through neighborhoods in Detroit, it is, there's a lot, there is the script, there is the description of the problem out there that this is what drugs and crime will do to a city. Well, no, this is what banks and foreclosures and tax foreclosures and nothing has accelerated the decline, the blight in the city of Detroit like what happened. There are families who wanted to stay in their homes and who were pushed out, who were targeted by predatory lenders. First, there's redlining, so there is no conventional lending going on. There's no access to cash. Everybody needs access. If you're going to maintain a home, you're going to need access to money to do that. And it's just not available. Then there's this void, and it's perfect. It's like the perfect storm, the perfect opportunity for predatory lenders to swoop in and offer money at an exorbitant price and take out mortgages on the homes. Most of these mortgages were designed in a way, and Mark can talk about this somewhat, that the ACLU, which has filed a national class action suit because families in Detroit were targeted by, it went beyond the banks to Wall Street, by Morgan Stanley and Wall Street. Anyone see the movie Big Short? Okay, New Century Mortgage and Morgan Stanley are featured in that movie, and there's a description of what happened. But basically, they targeted families and they required these loans to have 3 of 5 predatory features in every loan, which guaranteed that they would fail. Because the loans, many of them, especially for low-income people, were HUD insured and backed by the federal government. So it made more sense to foreclose and get paid by and quickly get paid by the insurer, the government, we the people, and then move on and relend the money at an exorbitant interest rate. And so that's why most of these cases could not be settled, because you had the government standing in the background ready to make payment.
What do you want to know?
Can I just add something on eminent domain? As it relates to water shutoffs and children in the city of Detroit, we're also seeing it in Flint. If you live in a home that does not have running water for more than 72 hours, it opens the door to be able to have your children removed. It also opens the door to use eminent domain to seize your property if there's not running water and it's an occupied home. But what I have here is, and if you can't see it, we can show it to you later. But all of the purple shading is housing that has been impacted by water debt in 2014. The only space that has not been contaminated is downtown and midtown.
There was a question back there, and then one behind you.
I don't know if you can explain this to me, but your water bill comes with water and sewage. Sewage is always higher than water. How is your sewage use calculated? How do they calculate how much sewage a person uses? So they can bill you accordingly. How is that calculated?
You know, there was another court case, a federal court case years ago that was brought to protect the rivers and to clean up the local, the Detroit River and the River Rouge, and it required that we build a combined sewer overflow system so that when there's a flood, and you can see that we didn't do that very well when we had the massive flood a couple of years ago, but they had to completely restructure the sewer system. And we are bearing the cost of that. That's why the sewage costs are higher than they were. That's about, I couldn't begin to tell you otherwise what the other cost elements are for calculating sewage, but that decision in that case years ago accounts for a large part of the sewage costs are generally 3 times the water costs in any bill. And even on vacant property, if you own vacant property, you're going to be charged for the pipe, for the redevelopment. They essentially had to build a separate sewage system to deal with overflow. When the sewers would overflow and the runoff would go directly into the rivers and then into the lakes and pollute them, they had to build a separate system, so there was a separate treatment for the overflow water.
So
And
are we
that's
all
what-
billed, but we're probably all billed at a different rate for that overflow. I'm sure if you live in the city of Detroit, depending on where you live, you pay this amount, as opposed to someone else living in another part of the city that they pay another amount.
There was a tack on that happened this year where there was, about 6 years of uncalculated water debt related to sewage. And so,
In some areas.
yeah, it's certain areas, but that's why you'll see probably a fluctuation. Those people got like several years of that expense imposed on them in one swoop. So that's the distinction in terms of some communities seeming as though they're getting a break. They're not actually getting a break, it's just that those other communities are now being charged where they weren't charged for those years past.
Is it basically that the process of putting water through a sewage process is just more costly than probably delivering clean water, right? It's just the whole process of.
Yeah, it costs more to process it.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a question over here. Yeah.
I just want to point out that they reduced the number of employees they've had at the water sewage treatment plant, and apparently it was caught fire several times in the last week. Where they're processing the poop chutes are catching fire, because there's not enough people to maintain them. That's what happens when you privatize for profit, processing the poop.
It's also creating a cost savings for DTE, because DTE is the beneficiary of taking that poop and transitioning it into a fuel source. Yes.
No, I have a question. Did the state of Michigan ever pay the $5 million it owes on the old state fairgrounds water bill?
No,
So
they
still
haven't
haven't
paid.
paid it, but they're cutting everyone else's bill.
They haven't paid the $5 million on the state fairgrounds. They haven't paid the $2 million on Dexter Elmhurst. They also failed to pay the $224 million in revenue sharing. So we had no debt.
Right,
It was
exactly.
their debt.
They
That's a very good point, because Highland Park is dealing with the city of Detroit sued Highland Park, which is bankrupt, for $20 million for unpaid wholesale costs. And the city of Highland Park then turned to the state of Michigan, and this came out of the governor's office, because the state of Michigan had not paid the city of Highland Park at least $25 million for runoff costs for the Davison Freeway. And the interesting response, now, Highland Park has been under emergency management, and so during that period, they weren't really, nobody could figure out how to bill anyone, and so for at least now 5 or 6 years, residents of Highland Park have not received bills. Now they're suddenly getting hit with bills of $3,000 or more. And the response of the governor's office to the complaint by residents of Highland Park that the state owed $25 million to Highland Park was, well, because they also hadn't billed the state, was, well, we weren't billed. So we acknowledge that we'll pay it now, but we weren't billed and we're not going to pay for past amounts that may be due because we were never billed. I think that argument should be good to apply to the residents who are also now making the same argument. We weren't billed for 6 years. We shouldn't have to pay $3,000. Yet their bills are being sent to collection agencies. Have not been shut off yet. They have not gone to massive shutoffs, but they're threatening to do that.
Mark? So I'm going to help moderate. Yeah. Because Eliza's doing something else. We have one person here. He's been waiting a long time.
Sure, go ahead, please.
And then we'll come over to Martina, and there was a person over here. So please.
To this lady's question about how sewage is calculated, is there a formula or is there a flat rate per use? I mean, is there a flat rate? I understand that certain parts of the city might pay a different amount, but is that from house to house in the same region? Is there a formula for calculating?
So I can actually help answer this question. So the sewage is based on your water usage, but also the square footage of your roof, based on the water runoff coming off your roof. It's like, I don't know exactly what it is, but it's rather simple.
I think some of this stuff is discretionary. I mean, again,
we have kind of a queue. We have kind of a queue. So did somebody else want to try and answer that question on the panel?
there is a formula.
Okay, there's some sort of formula. I'm going to suggest that we switch gears. It's a good question, but there's answers out there probably on a website somewhere. We can put those up on our website. So there's a lot of other conversations that, sorry, say again.
Food and Water Watch.
Food and Water Watch website. So let's go to Martina, and then there was a woman over here. I'm not in the right order, and I apologize, but lots of questions and comments.
So Mark and Monica, I wanted to talk about, who's familiar with Detroit Future City in here? Can you talk about like sort of Detroit's future city impact on sort of, it seems to me that there's like sort of these neighborhoods that all of the money is being driven into, and how does that play into water shutoffs? Do they line up? Do the neighborhoods where all the money are being driven into also line up with the neighborhoods that are being disinvested in? Do we see more foreclosures and water shutoffs in the disinvested neighborhoods? I'm wondering if you have a take on that.
Right now, we're conducting some research that I mentioned earlier, where we are not only looking at the impact of austerity as it relates to school closings, charter openings, where those monies were diverted. We're looking at the impact of the pension cuts. We're looking at health impacts. We're looking at also not only just the water piece, but then land and land displacement. And so what we're doing a comparisons in terms of the mapping around the water, specifically the water as it relates to Detroit Future City. And what you see is a shocking, very much aligned kind of mirroring of what we're seeing with the water shutoffs and what we're seeing with this gentrification agenda that's being implemented. And so even the one that I showed you earlier, the only communities within the city of Detroit that have not been impacted by water and water debt is downtown and midtown. So what that says to me is that all of the other parts of the city are up for grabs. And they have identified certain locations that they want to save and others that they are fully open to letting be either annexed into bordering communities. Because as our understanding, about 20 years ago, there was a group of people that studied something called the city within the city. And so the goal is really the only piece of what will be left of Detroit will be downtown and midtown. Everything else eventually will become either its own city or it will be annexed into another city.
And I'm curious as to what's the why? Like, I mean, as a journalist, I keep thinking, what's the macro plan? Like, why is this happening and why is this happening?
The goal is to strip Detroit down so that politically it does not have the power and influence that it once had. The goal is to make Grand Rapids the center jewel piece of the state. It's also about being able to divert resources. We know that connected to population is also federal dollars. And so for a long time, Detroit had been seen as getting all of these federal dollars connected to our population and our demographics. Well, the shift wants to be Grand Rapids. That's part of the reason that Snyder was tapped to run for governor. That's part of the reason Mark Showers was tapped, is both of them come out of Grand Rapids. And so it's about a shift in power. It's a power dynamic. Now it plays out for us on the ground as class and race and all of that, but at this macro level of dynamics, it's about a power shift. I mean, if you look at Veolia, the chairman of Veolia is DeVos.
Oh. Who?
If you look at the American Water Workers Association, the chair of that is Charles Koch, of the Koch brothers.
It's not
And-
focused here, it's not Michigan anymore.
Well, with the Koch brothers, what you'll find is that they have created a plastic sleeve that they are producing and preparing for this massive national rebuilding of the infrastructure. And so for them, it bodes well either way you go. They're gonna make money. They're gonna make money whether we're struggling to access clean water. They're gonna make money in terms of selling us the plastic for the bottles, for the bottled water. They're gonna make money for the plastic and the systems created for the filtration. And so it's disaster capitalism at its finest. Either way they go, they get paid. And so that's what we gotta understand about this dynamic that we're in right now and why it's so critical that we're talking to each other and we're collaborating and working together, is that their agenda is meant to extract from us as many dollars and as much wealth and as many assets as possible. This is not people looking out to save us or help us. They're looking to take from us. We're the ones that better decide we're gonna save ourselves.
And I would add to that, I don't know that it's just a matter of taking. You know, if you're prosecuting a hot war, you know, you go in for the purpose of killing people. I mean, you're out to kill. I mean, that's what, and I think that for us to have the proper mindset, we have to understand that the people are the targets of a war. I mean, people outside of the state will shrug their shoulders and say, well, how can they poison those poor children in Flint? You know, how can they cut off the water in Detroit? You know, how can they tax foreclose on so many thousands of people? They're out to kill. They're out to drive out a population so that they can bring back in a desirable population. They will get rid of you by whatever means necessary. And don't even talk about eminent domain, because that involves compensating people. Why compensate them when they can just drive you out and kill you?
That's right.
That's right.
Just one second, we have one person here, I just want to get a capture. You have a hand, how many other people wanted to ask a question? I just want to see it real quick. We may not get all of it. So we're going to go this way after here.
Just right quick, you mentioned Snyder, and what was the other name from Grand Rapids? That just like punched me in the stomach. Okay, thanks. And this is sort of a straightforward question, but it helps as a talking point sometimes. Like, how many homes are currently without water in Detroit? If I was trying to speak intelligently about that.
That's why we're doing the research. Nobody
Okay.
knows.
Yeah.
If you ask Gary Brown about the DWSD, they don't know. If you look at trying to utilize the Freedom of Information Act, then they block it. The Jones Day attorneys that now have infiltrated the city of Detroit's law department they block it. So even all of the methods that should allow us free access to information that we pay for, because we pay for all the people that do this work, we're being disallowed. And so we're working collaboratively with the Global Health Initiative at Henry Ford and Alex Plum, as well as Peter Hammer and the Damon Keefe Civil Rights Center, to really try to drill down into why are they going to such painstaking efforts to prevent the American people, and specifically the people of Detroit and Flint, from getting this information.
This way, I don't remember, let's just go in this general direction.
Is there a current lawsuit that ACLU is doing against over the tax foreclosures? I'm curious how that's going, because and I also wonder about the property tax exemption, if there's a way to hold the city accountable, because it's illegal as far as I understand. That is not, that people aren't able to access it.
The answer to the question is no. There is a lot of research going on right now, a number of different advocacy strategies and options being considered, but there is no penetration.
Yeah. Like you said, they're out to the Koch brothers, Jones, whoever, and the whole system is out to destroy a generation now and generations in the future. And I'm saying that because, you know, I have 4 children, and I'm a grandpa. And I thought when I bought my house back in 1968 that I would be able to pass something on. And now it's worth half of what I paid in 1968. So that means there's generational genocide going on.
That's right, that's right.
You know, I won't be able to pass on any wealth. And I gave 27 years to the Army, 23 years to the city of Detroit, and they took 15% of my pension and then sent back my burial policy. I had a $5,000 policy so I could be cremated. And they said, well, you only put in over 23 years about $1,500. So you can have that as your burial, or we'll send you the check. So what in the world is going on? I mean, it seems like somebody's trying to get us to do a super 1967 and just knock us all off. Because I am really pissed off, and I'm 72 years old, and I'm ready to fight.
Well, they are trying to knock everybody off. But I think what we have to do is we have to become very analytical, all right? And back in the 70s, Huey Newton, who was the founder of the Black Panther Party, came up with a theory that everybody laughed at, and to this day, there are a lot of people who laugh at it, but which I think is brilliant, and which I think most people have not even caught up to yet. He was so far ahead. He came up with a theory called revolutionary intercommunalism. And everybody said, what is it? What he said, basically, and I'll try and explain it, he said that the major corporate entities on this planet have long ago disregarded the idea of municipal boundaries, national borders, and they see the entire world as their playground. And that they make common cause with other powerful entities and corporations throughout the world. And they collaborate and they cooperate for the purpose of controlling it. And one of the ways in which they control it is while they're ignoring national boundaries. They convince all the people that they're oppressing that they're limited by those boundaries. And they keep everybody else divided. So that they have people thinking that the only place in which I can struggle is Detroit. I can't even struggle nationally. And those who think beyond Detroit think the only place I can struggle is the United States. I can't struggle across national boundaries. And so what he said is that they're going to be reactionary and intercommunal internationally, that the oppressed people of the world also need to be intercommunal, and they need to make common cause with people who are struggling around the world. The problem that people have in this city and everywhere else is that they lack power. And power does not mean that they lack money. Money does not equal power. Power means that you are in possession of whatever that is or whatever that thing is that allows you to do whatever it is that you want to do, and nobody can stop you, nobody can say anything about it. You just do it because you want to do it. That's power. And on this planet, the thing that makes for power is control of natural resources. Whether it's oil or valuable minerals
Water.
Water is the oil.
or anything that is necessary for an economy to function. So if we're sitting here in Detroit and we're powerless, if we're going to be revolutionary in an intercommunal sort of a way, we need to be thinking beyond the boundaries of Detroit and making alliances and struggling with people who are in places where there is oil and where there are valuable resources which the oppressors understand, appreciate, and respect. And if there's that type of solidarity, where we stand up for each other, where if people who are sitting on top of large resources say, unless you cut on the water for the people of Detroit, you don't get the oil, you don't get the diamonds, you don't get the chromium, you don't get the whatever it is. Unless we have that, then we continue to be powerless and subject to the manipulation of these people who want to keep us boxed into these little national boundaries and municipal boundaries. That's serious power. You have to go international if you're going to get the kind of power that you want.
Hey, Craig, Darian has had his hand up.
You've got to understand what kind of power you have. When we were accepted into the World Water Justice Council back in October, everybody sitting at the table represents a country. This is a world council around water. Everybody at the table represents a country except for Detroit. So I want you to sit with that. If you didn't know you had power, I'm telling you, you have power.
We're a country.
Detroit, yes. Because at that table, we're the only entity that is not a country.
We're gonna let Darian go since Lolita called him out.
Yep.
Go ahead, Darian.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, I wanted to mention something and then I wanted to ask a question. But someone asked about Detroit Future City earlier. And Monica, you touched on this, I think, but also they propose innovative productive zone, basically to wipe out like entire areas on the east side, entire areas off of MLK. And basically they want to have industrialized farming that doesn't even support grocery stores within the city to provide natural food for people who really want to support downtown and midtown. And that's kind of where they're coming from, and that's where you see the foreclosures happening and a lot of water shutoffs happening, in my understanding at least. And that's just my research I've done. But then my question was around, at least for the college students here, I know that a lot of us are busy and it's hard to restructure our time in big ways, but we want to get involved. And I was wondering, what are ways that we can get involved that are flexible and maybe not time consuming, but also set us up for bigger things to come?
I know for us, it would be around water delivery. In not only the city of Detroit, but in Flint, we've had to, from a people-driven self-determination perspective, create our own rapid water delivery response team. So we're always needing help in terms of shifting water. If you didn't know, a gallon of water weighs about 8.7 pounds. For older people, for people with several children, for sick people, that is difficult to shift the amount of water that they would need to just take care of themselves, to consume, to clean, that kind of thing. So there are times where we will do what we call a huge water shift. Like we took several trucks up to Flint, and we need to unload those trucks. Well, we can schedule those, especially if we know that we have massive numbers of people that can commit to certain days or certain times. The other thing we do is we have 4 water stations here in the city of Detroit. Flint actually took that model and they're emulating it there. Then we do what we call water drops. These are people that go and deliver water to people that can't get to a water station. So there's always room to be able to volunteer there. We have a water rights hotline where we train people to be able to take in the information from the people that are calling, be able to walk them through what's available in terms of resources. Also, sometimes people just need a third party on the line as they're dealing with DWSD because it's such a monster to sort of manage. I know that we're doing some research with several different entities around the different aspects of austerity. So for those that are researchers and investigators and scientific kinds of thinkers, there's room there. There's going to be some modeling here, but then we're going to replicate it in Flint. And we're looking at some other parts of the country to do that. People that are interested in mapping, GIS mapping, or have that capacity or want to learn to do that, there's some room there. There's a water testing research project that will start in April. So people that really want to get in the neighborhood and be a part of that facilitation of teaching people how to capture the water in a clean way so that it can be sent to the lab, so that we can look at what contaminants are there. We're looking at more than just lead. We're looking at 18 different toxins. So those are some places I know you can plug in. I know that the People's Water Board is another place people can plug in if you want to do work around policy and shifting policies. Being sort of a watchdog over the DWSD and the Great Lakes Water Authority, there's a need there. We also need people that are willing to host what we call water parties, places where you gather in a natural way and where we can bring in some of our experts. And I'm 50, so I'm not the youngest of the group. We actually have some amazing young people that work on this issue and have organized all across this state with other young people. We need people that are willing to link and actually use art and music and different forums, because people learn and engage in different ways. If you have any kinds of expertise around social media, website development, those kinds of things, we need to be connecting this on a national level. There is a website that was just released, Ms. Lila? Is she still here?
Yes.
What's the name of the website?
Affordable Water Now.
Affordable Water Now is a national website where it will be linking all of the water concerns, policies, issues on a national level. So there's a place for you there. We're always needing flyers and memes and things of that nature that speak to young people, that speak to people in a quick way. So there is a place for everybody. I mean, there's nobody in this room, you can't tell me that there's something you can't give to this work. There is somewhere for you.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that. I want to suggest some things that personally I prefer that college students not do. And that is just relying on tactics and strategies that they've seen used historically. Right? Because even Dr. King didn't do that. All right? So unless you're just going to go out for purposes of consciousness raising, just staging a march is not necessarily going to strike a decisive blow against the enemy. Okay? The enemy feels it when you take him out of his comfort zone, when you mess up his stuff, when you start messing with his money. Okay? And in order to figure out how to do that, you've got to get analytical. So Dr. King staged many marches, but at the very end of his life, he was putting together the Poor People's Campaign, which many people don't know was an effort to take over Washington, D.C. He was going to take thousands of poor people from across the country and have them physically occupy the offices of Congress people. And he was going to take sick people and have them occupy the hallways of hospitals. He was going to take members of the anti-war movement and have them occupy the Pentagon, and they were going to shut the government down until they got an economic bill of rights. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily a strategy to be emulated. What I am saying is that in the same way that he had to get very creative, in order to strike a blow, then I think that young activists have to do the same thing if they're going to make a difference. See, I work with police all the time. This whole thing with police killings, I have to talk to them all the time. I have to discuss things. I have to deal with them a lot. And one thing that is crystal clear to me is that they understand movement activities very well. They study how demonstrations are put together. They prepare their officers to deal with it. And their whole objective is to have those things come out with no more effect than a Sunday afternoon picnic. They will, in the past, you could count on the police to get out there and beat you up and do some other things that might provoke a reaction and get some sympathy for you. They're not going to do that now. They're gonna get out there, they're gonna walk with you, they're gonna help you, they're gonna protect you, they might even chant with you. You know, and that does not inconvenience the system. You know, that can educate some people. I'm not saying don't demonstrate, but understand what you're accomplishing when you do it and what you're not accomplishing. And I think that the brain power that comes from youth, especially their understanding of technology and the ways in which the world functions on a technical level, you know, that many of us who are older don't understand, you know, can be an incredible contribution to movement work.
So Kim gets the last question because we have a time frame here at 9, which is coming up. And before Kim asks it, I want to say this. I want to invite all of you 2 weeks from now. I'm Craig, by the way, and I work with Eliza in this whole class. 2 weeks from tonight is what we're calling land grabs. And this is really part 1 in many respects to a lot of the conversation, especially about the land bank, which came up a little bit. But many of the other issues we discussed will continue in sort of a part 2 because, of course, there's always going to be a part 2 and a part 3. 2 weeks from tonight is that conversation. There is not a class next week, but before Kim gets to that, the last quick question. Next week is the optional trip to Bert's in the Marketplace Jazz Club. And so everybody's invited, and we're going to have Bill Meyer and the RGB Trio, who perform every Thursday night at Open Jazz Night. It's one of the most amazing nights in Detroit every week. And Robert Jones, I'm pretty sure we confirmed him, right?
Reverend
Robert Jones is going to do a wonderful history of, a history of American music, is what I call it, in one song, which is amazing. And so Bert's is open to everybody next week. So we welcome you all to come, starting around 7 next week at Bert's. 2 weeks from tonight, back in here for part 2, land grabs. Kim gets a quick question. Eleanor gets to make an announcement, and then we're going to go.
Quick statement.
Statement.
So, I was motivated by what you said about leaving generational wealth. I think we put a little bit too much emphasis on dollars and cents, and our wealth is in our relationships. You know, and understand, no, I was just gonna say, just in general, and understanding how dollars and cents actually work in our movement, and how we use all that in strategy. So, just, you know, like I was saying, teaching your young people what time it is right now, right? Dollars and cents and generational wealth is not where we are at this point because there's too many things we're up against, and keeping that is really important. But it's really important for them to understand the dynamics in which things are happening right now. But you just made me think about that.
No, but it's got to be really fast.
Yeah, and just really, really quickly, because I know exactly what Oscar's talking about in terms of how you help to build on that. That's one of the things you always ask, well, why black people haven't finally made it in this country? Because every time there's movement, you're undercut like this. And I think we have to change the way we think about what we value. So you can't go on the basis of what they tell you your house is worth, because that's all manipulated anyway. That house is a house, good structure, take care of it. So you look at the wealth of it in terms of that structure exists and keep it in the family, and they always have somewhere to live and to maintain the neighborhood. And don't worry what price tag they put on it downtown, because what your house is worth just in terms of brick and mortar and wood, they don't even calculate that. It's all imaginary economics. So don't feel like you lost.
Before you go, thank you. New announcement, Lila wanted to let me know that People's Water Board information is all over here on this table if you want to grab something. Eleanor has an announcement, and then we're going to applaud our wonderful speakers. Eleanor, real quick.
Hi, just 1 minute of your time. Me and my colleague Nora in the yellow hat and my colleague Hannah right here are campaigning for paid sick leave in Michigan. So this would give workers paid time off to take care of themselves or a sick child. 2 ways this is interconnected with what we've been talking about. One, this issue disproportionately affects people of color, low-income people. If you're particularly vulnerable to sickness if you're dehydrated, or your water has been poisoned, or your housing insecure. So this is just another way that, part 2, you can be part of the solution, you can be part of the government. By signing this petition, this would help us get this issue on the November ballot for the public to vote on. Snyder has currently blocked legislation of this kind in cities like Detroit, so the only way to get this passed is if we work together and get these signatures. So if you want to approach us, ask us questions. It will take 5 seconds of your time, and you can make a difference tonight. Woo!
shares, they're asking us to stack them against the wall and to throw away all of our trash.